Hello, my name is Dr. Eric Hollander, and I'm with Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Montefiore Medical Center in New York City. And I'm also with the Spectrum Neuroscience Foundation. So, as part of the foundation, we're very interested in looking at mental health issues and symptoms that cut across different conditions. And we're interested in trying to develop breakthrough new treatments, but also to talk a little about how the media and how public perception really influences the way that we see these different spectrum neuroscience type issues. So I'm really pleased to be with David Russel, who's probably the most outstanding American filmmaker these days, and who's portrayed a number of really important mental health issues and psychiatric disorders in his films, like Silver Linings Playbook. So, David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dr. Hollander.
Okay. So, first, I thought I'd start with Silver Linings Playbook because that's really an extraordinary film, and that the characters in the film have important individual differences, and portray a number of different mental health issues. So, bipolar disorder, or obsessive compulsive disorder, or compulsive gambling related issues, depression, for example. And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about some of your thoughts, or why you use that as a key subject matter in that movie and some of the other movies that you've been involved in.
I think that part of it is the fact that I've had personal experience with it in my own family, and so have some of the actors I work with have had experience in their own families, and I also just think, many times if you look at some of our greatest scientists or artists, whether it's Vincent van Gogh or some of our greatest physicists, they all were complicated people who could probably be diagnosed in different ways. And so very often, I think beauty and passion go together with what might be classified as not typical in a neuroscience way. And sometimes it's just simply sad and destructive, and sometimes it can be more inspired. So having been through it with my own family, I look for the ways that it can be an inspiration. As part of family members who have faced challenges, you have to find an inspiring way of approaching it, which is as important as any medication.
Mm-hmm. Inspiration and determination also, in terms of many of your characters are really very determined, right?
Yeah.
They have a particular goal. So, it's clear that people who are geniuses or highly creative are not average. Individuals who are average in a bell-shaped curve wouldn't have extraordinary characteristics. And so it is true that people will have certain syndromes, whether it's bipolar spectrum disorders or autism spectrum disorders, for example, may have sparks of creativity or genius, or have individual differences that offer certain unique perceptions or skills.
Yeah, I think that they tend to be there can be greater sensitivity, heightened sensitivity, deeper emotion, feel emotions much more intensely. They can perceive and feel things much more deeply about many things that we've learned to cope with and sort of handle socially. Well, there's something interesting about someone who feels it more deeply. And I always think it's interesting to see the so-called outsider shed light upon the so-called normals. It really asks the question about identity.
Mm-hmm. Well, many of the characters in your movies are outsiders, then, right? There's something about their background. So, for example, in Silver Linings Playbook, I guess the Bradley Cooper character is somebody who was hospitalized in a state facility with bipolar disorder, had been hospitalized because he had attacked somebody who was having an affair with his wife. So that he's starting from that perspective, I guess, right at the beginning of the movie, right? His mom is taking him out of this state facility and bringing him back to the family. Um, you have some thoughts about that? His character as sort of an outsider?
Yeah, I mean, much of the cinema that I love is based on anti-heroes. You know, going back to Scorsese or
Uh,
even Frank Capra, uh, even Howard Hawks. They tend to. I mean, these are characters that are typically fascinating or entertaining because they're living in a more intense or poetic way, and that's part of their drama and part of their story. It makes us be able to identify with them. Is that they're living an experience or an adventure that there, but for the grace of God, it could be us, or anybody else in our family. So it's only a personal way, and that's what makes it riveting. Like anytime you hear any story going back in time, once upon a time there was a person. And you find some way of relating to that. So it's an avenue into the intensity of storytelling. That novel by Matthew Quick. Matthew Quick is the novelist who's from the Philadelphia area. He wrote Silver Linings Playbook. Sidney Pollack, the late director, and a great director, had brought it to me to adapt it. And he thought, because of my own personal experience with some members of my own family, that I seemed to have an understanding of how to do it in a way that was not going to be cliched, not going to be he said it's a very delicate line to walk, where it's human, it's serious, it's emotional, yet it's also alive and funny, even if unintentionally so. I mean, there's many scenes, in retrospect, from my own, that I've been through with my son that were funny. We can both laugh about them in retrospect, or in fact, we can laugh about them. And some of them are just sad. And we can sit back and say, that's sad, and those would be avoided. So Matthew Quick wrote this book. He had worked in a mental hospital in the Philadelphia area, and he worked as a teacher. And so he wrote the novel about that, and that's where that character got started in a state mental hospital for having had that altercation with the lover of his wife.
There's something about the place, Philadelphia, and I guess the Eagles and the Eagle fanatics, right? So I guess the family, particularly the Robert De Niro character, is a Eagles fanatic, right? And the Bradley Cooper character and Bradley Cooper's brother also. There are a whole family of Eagles fanatics, right? Who act out at the games and drink and gamble and have all kinds of superstitious thoughts about that. Can you say more about sports fanatics, for example, in any of these issues?
Yes, I mean, there's all kinds of. I find any culture or subculture fascinating and colorful and alive and riveting. And that's what I look for as a filmmaker. What is riveting? Because it just is what it is. You almost can't even. What is it? And when I found ourselves in Philadelphia, I found it was such a specific culture, the Eagles culture, with such specific passion and such specific history, that I found it fascinating. And every household had a different story, and a different superstition, and a different compulsive behavior that was required on game days, or rituals, which is a sort of kind of normalized or acceptable borderline behavior. People who paint their faces green or do things. I mean, sports is a place where you're allowed to go and express some of your wilder aspects, either as a participant in sports or as a fan. And that's a very alive part of us. I mean, Freud wrote Civilization and Its Discontents, the main point of which is that we're all sitting on a mountain of wildness inside of ourselves. We're filled with wildness of generations of wild animals and untamed impulses. And it's held together by a veil of civilization. So it's interesting how we have a relationship with what is not normally. Sometimes the civilization can kind of flatten the life out of you. So it's a balance, those faced with challenges, because they want to participate, they want to be civilized, and they want to be engaged in society and learn how to do that, which is crucial and critical. But they also want to maintain their own individuality and aliveness. Eagles culture was a big part of that household's individuality. And De Niro's character had so much of what he's played over the years as an actor in terms of the intensity and the craziness and sort of a lovableness, nevertheless. So that, and and there's compulsive gambling involved in that, and there's superstitions in gambling, and people don't typically think of that as a mental health issue, but if you've been up close and personal with it, with someone who has a gambling problem, it's most certainly a mental health issue.
Right. Well, I think the Nero character was great, and it rang true to me because so many people have a mixture of these compulsive features and impulsive features and impulse control issues and mood instability, but he was a sort of a lovable character, and there was a real sense of family there as well, which I thought was good. I also thought it was hilarious the way that you depicted the psychiatrist also as a Eagles fan who got swept up in face painting as well.
Yeah. The psychiatrist character, Dr. Patel, was written by Matthew Quick and then adapted by me in the screenplay. And it was kind of wonderful to have somebody who is a very good therapist who has to deal with a behavioral program that this Bradley Cooper character is trying very sincerely to live. He's very sincerely trying to live a more positive life, and he's, as so often happens, they want to do it without the medication because they feel that the medication either puts weight on or it feels like an insult to their self-esteem that they have to take a pill. It's a stigma. And we saw that stigma very often. There are many arguments in many households of people I've met who are very familiar with that debate with any loved one, where they say, I don't want to have to take my medication. And the families say, my goodness, if they would just take their medication, life would be a bit easier in this household. And we'd love it if they would treat it as if they were just a diabetes person. You have to take your insulin. It's that simple.
Right.
And sometimes that changes. Sometimes the medication needs to change. It's not as clean a topic as insulin. Anyway, sorry, what we were saying.
Okay. Well, I guess it is all sort of a balancing act, and you talk about civilization, sort of balancing people's primitive, volatile type influences, and even in brain circuitry, you have all the limbically driven impulses or the striatally driven habits, for example.
Now, what's the limbic?
Well, the limbic system is the emotional, the primitive reptilian brain that drives desires like food and sex, but also aggression and intense emotion. And you have the frontal lobe sort of regulating that. And it's all about balance between different systems, whether it's inside or outside the body, or even if it's different parts of the brain, really having to sort of coexist in balance as well.
You said the limbic system, and then you said the striatic system?
Right, so the limbic system is the sort of the primitive emotional brain. The striatal or the basal ganglia system is involved in sort of trial and error learning. It's how the brain automates behavior to be more efficient, and how individuals learn through trial and error to develop routines that become automatic, and those routines can either be destructive habits or can be positive habits as well that allow you to be more efficient. That's the same basic striatal circuitry. And then there's the frontal lobes that are involved in more goal-directed behavior and sort of regulate these other regions of the brain. So
I'm not trying to understand the striatic.
Well, the striatum is a way that we learn because we do things that are associated with positive feedback, or we do things that are associated with punishment. And our unconscious brain learns through trial and error to develop certain kinds of behaviors or habits that can, so when you're driving a car, or riding a bicycle, it's a habit behavior. Your striatum has learned these things, so you don't have to think about it. It's no longer conscious. All of these things are going on in an unconscious, automatic fashion, which relieves, your frontal lobes to deal with other kinds of issues. The problem is that sometimes the brain develops these habits, and that those habits can be destructive and continue even though they're no longer being rewarded by the environment.
So what are examples of some habits?
Well, habits could be obsessive compulsive behavior. So De Niro superstitious habits of wanting to hold the television remote in a certain way because that may be associated with a good or a negative outcome with the Eagles, as an example. Or it could be
Well, that's where habits become sort of OCD.
right,
Almost.
right.
Yeah.
But it turns out that these same habits occur whether they're OCD behaviors or whether they're addictions, because addictions are just learned habits as well. And the striatum sort of automates those behaviors so they occur without really
By
thinking.
striatum, you mean it's a part of the brain?
Yeah, the basal ganglia, or we call it the striatum.
Where is that located?
That's sort of right in the middle, and it's kind of so it sits underneath the frontal cortex, and but it gets signals from the limbic system, and but it's the key circuit and region that drives all kinds of compulsive behaviors and all kinds of impulsive behaviors.
So this is almost making me think of the animated film that came out last year called Inside Out,
Right.
where there are lots of different aspects that are competing with each other
Right.
in their minds.
Well, absolutely, and that's what's so fascinating is that you can have different brain systems driving you towards very different emotions or different behaviors at the same time, and that they may be working in concert, or they may be working at cross purposes as well. We may not understand why we're doing certain things, so we may not have conscious awareness about that, but that these other brain regions may be driving behaviors or driving thoughts that may not be the most productive, but nevertheless continue over and over again. So you had mentioned a couple of times experience that you've had in terms of family members who have had mental health issues that have sort of motivated you to explore some of these issues about differences and talk about mental health issues in your movies. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, I think when you have the experience of having lived through something, whatever it is, and it could be an issue in any area of our society, whether it involves race or it involves income inequality or whatever it involves, it's going to become a personal care of yours, and so if I instantly recognize it. We went down to the Senate floor, Bradley Cooper and I, when Silver Linings came out, because Senator Debbie Stabenow at the time from Michigan was introducing a bill for mental health parity, because very often mental health treatment is not given parity in healthcare. It's treated like a separate thing that doesn't count.
Right.
And which is, anybody who's had to face it knows that it's a serious health issue. So I then looked into the bipartisan senator, a Republican, I believe from Missouri, Blount, who was joining her on this bill, which I'm sure many members of his party may not have supported. Because she was actually working for more supported healthcare, more inclusive healthcare. And I looked in his eyes, and as soon as I looked in the senator's eyes, I said, "You've been there, haven't you?" And he said, "Yes." And you know right away when someone has had personal experiences with this, you can see it in their soul and in their heart. They've been there with a loved person, and therefore you care about it, and you therefore get familiar with the systems that are available, and you do your best to find the best system to help those you love, and you also find that there's a need for better systems. For example, there's a whole population, and I've spoken to Tina Brown about this, the former editor of Vanity Fair, who's an editor, and she, there's a huge population of young people coming of age right now in their 20s who have faced different challenges on the mental health spectrum, and they need a sort of gray area where they're able to have supervision of some kind yet discover independence without it necessarily being a hospital, without it necessarily being a halfway house, without it, with it being kind of a beautiful community that's supportive in some way. And that's what I'm working to help build, because gosh, there's just not enough of it, of those kind of places, Well,
you're absolutely right that some of the strongest supporters of mental health research have been individuals like Pete Domenici, who have been touched by having family members who have lived through some of these issues, and they were the strongest supporters of developing new treatments, for example. And I do agree with you that a huge unmet need really is young adults who have, whether they have developmental issues or mental health issues, that have individual strengths and weaknesses. They'll identify those individual strengths and match that with employment opportunities that can take advantage
Yes.
of that as well,
Yeah.
as well as supportive kind of situations that encourage independence.
Well, and it isn't, and yeah, and it's also finding things you love. I would say that's a great blessing when excuse me, as well, I'm turning this off. When you find, if a young person has something they love, that to me is half the battle.
Right.
If they know what they love, and whatever it is, whether it's math or being outdoors or exercise or science or art or theater,
Right.
it gives you that's everything. And I think not just for people who face mental health issues, I think that applies for everybody.
Right.
If you want to make it through life, if you have things that you love, I mean, Freud said really what you need to get through life, and then somebody embellished upon it is, someone or something to love, some work to do, and something to look forward to. And those are three essential things that, very simple, they really simplify this strange proposition called life on this planet, which many humans find challenging for many reasons. Going as far back as literature exists. I mean, the great novelists in every language have looked at this oddness of life that we face and how we make sense of it, and how we find a way of dealing with our own and others' troubles. And culture is a big part of it. It gives you a vessel to live in. So if you have something you love,
Right.
and it really is a big thing to helping you get through life, and finding. And I have to say, everybody from Jack Nicholson to the famous depressive Abraham Lincoln has made very clear the thing that I've learned, which is that you have to try to incline yourself upwards. And it may sound. It doesn't mean to sound goody-goody. I mean, everybody understands. I understand darkness and gothic truths. I mean, those things are real, and I understand people who want to drill down and say, yeah, this is real. I don't want to try to hide or cover over things that are difficult or dark. At the same time, if that becomes a threat to some people with more unsure mental health, darkness can become a threat to their whole existence. And I think sometimes I feel like our culture isn't really even aware of the impact of darkness. We've been watching these. Bill Maher was talking about this last week, and we have been watching apocalyptic science fiction for many years. It's always the destruction of the earth. By ourselves, by nuclear war, by pollution, by aliens. That's a super powerful vision, that anyone who practices a vision would tell you, when you practice a vision, it has a way of kind of coming to life sometimes. Maybe not always in the way you thought of, and not to go into magic thinking, but it is true. Mind does have an impact on what can happen. And just like Dr. King said, if we believe in something positive and we're persistent, something positive can happen. And likewise, I think if you continually envision violence or apocalypse, as so many films do today, it's not an accident that's going to start showing up a lot. I think that there's a relationship there. So I do think inclining yourself upwards, as Nicholson, even Abraham Lincoln said, people are as happy as they make up their minds to be. We can either complain that rose bushes have thorns, or we can be happy that thorn bushes have roses. And I mean, I just think I don't see what I get. Somebody else said, I don't see what I get. I'm an optimist because I don't see what I get from being a pessimist. I just don't see what it gives me. So that has been a massive lesson I've learned from my son and other people I admire as a way through life.
Now I know that you your son Matt played in Silver Linings Playbook, and he played the role of a reporter actually who wanted to interview Bradley Cooper's family about bipolar disorder. Want to say something about placing him in the movie, or his passion about acting?
Well, the Matt, as long as since he was a little, 3-4 years old, his whole focus in life. It gave him excitement and inspiration. Was playing other characters and a narrative and story. So whether it was a film or a theater or a book, narrative captivated him and motivated him. And characters, and so he would dress up. I called him the man of 1,000 faces. He would dress up in so many different characters, even at the age. I have a book of him when he was 4 and 5. He's dressed up like Charlie Chaplin. He's dressed up like someone from the medieval times. He's dressed up like just one character after another. So he always acted, and acting is a passion of his, and he's practiced it all his life, and he's still an actor. And it was something that motivated him to earn the ability to audition and to perform in plays and in films. So he auditioned for that part, and he'd faced and we'd faced together as a family some emotional disorders or bipolar disorders or whatever, however you want to characterize them. They were emotional intensities that became unmanageable in the family, and that we all learned together how to face them and to move through them in a positive way. So for him to play in the movie, the whole movie was very, I think, destigmatizing. That was, I think, which was not. It's not. You can't really. If you want to, somebody once said, if you want to send a message, send a telegram or an email. You should never make a movie to send a message. You make a movie because you have love and passion for something, and the story captivates you. If it happens to also do something good, that's great.
The movie, played an important role in destigmatizing. So, that's what I liked a lot about Silver Linings, is that it did really destigmatize a lot of these issues. So, tell me more about that.
Yeah, I was saying, you never set out to make a mission in a movie. You just want to make a great story with great characters and that you feel true to and alive. But if it happens to have a great impact, that's great. And I think it's in my spirit that I embrace people who face challenges and want them to feel part of. And I've had to live it with all the people at the school Matt has gone to, the Glen Home School, which I've also been on the board of for many years, and I've known many of the families there. And you get, the more you're around something, the less stigmatized it feels. So that should be true of any subculture, whether it's again, like I say, economic, racial, gender oriented. It should be destigmatized and accepted, and that makes us a richer culture. So very often, because of the film, you had Jennifer. It was very exciting, I think, to see, all the kids that my son knows, to see Bradley Cooper, Robert De Niro, Jennifer Lawrence, Chris Tucker, in this story that dealt with issues that many of these families have faced. And many families face them and deny them for a long time, and some families have no choice but to get involved with a doctor such as yourself or a school. But many times I had people come up to me and in a place of work and say, "May I speak to you?" And I don't know what they're going to talk to me about. And they come in the side room and they say, and they name somebody in their family, and they say, I'm not sure what to do. And immediately, sometimes it's very emotional. Sometimes you feel very emotional with this person right away. You feel a kinship. And they ask for referrals, or they just share experiences sometimes, and it makes them feel less alone. And that's the most important thing, is to know you're not alone. And people would come up to me and say, I feel like I don't have to keep this private anymore. I can talk about it, and I can talk about it in the supermarket and be part of the world, and not something just to be swept under the carpet.
I think one of the things that I find fascinating about your movies is that you go after those individual differences, so flaws or differences, and you're fascinated by those things rather than sweeping them under the carpet, but that people get to know that better through the story, actually, and kind of see that makes the world a little bit richer.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's just the fact that, listen, everybody has different tastes. Art is subjective. Cinema is subjective, and the more different cinema, the better. I have always been drawn to the cinema that was not cold. I'd say the arts are filled with exaggerated emotional characters, and that's why it's a cousin of mental health in a way. But that's what, to me, that can all be used in a great way, in a constructive way. Just like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. I mean, Scorsese saying, "Gee, it's good to be an outsider." Certainly not. Was it very upsetting when John Hinckley took the wrong message from that film? Yes, it was. That the negative, destructive messages taken from art. I think I think any artist or filmmaker would say that's not the intention of this art, and that's not the intention of portraying these people. The intention is to live with these people and experience them as humans, and learn from it what you can, and to take away and make it a positive thing, not a destructive thing.
Well, I guess we're bombarded by images in the media and films and social media now in particular, and so there is a lot of anger and hostility being expressed, but there are also positive messages as well. Do you have any kind of final take-home messages for the viewers?
I just really very much appreciate your work that you do. And it's very special to find doctors and hospitals that are humane and patient and curious about how every case of mental health is different and needs to be handled with care and with hope. And to appreciate the gains and not try to dwell on the limitations. So that to me is the whole positiveness of your work.
Well, that's very kind of you. So thanks very much. So I'm Dr. Eric Hollander at Spectrum Neuroscience Foundation, and I'm here with David O. Russell, and we've been talking about his views on these issues and the films that really have had a major impact on the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay.